Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be exploring something pretty interesting.
Yeah.
It's called Kalkiism. It's this movement in Nepal, and they're advocating for like a complete economic do-over, a totally cashless society.
Really interesting stuff.
It is. And our sources for this deep dive are excerpts from a book outlining Kalkiism's vision. And oh boy, it is packed with some pretty bold economic analysis,
Oh, yeah.
social commentary, the whole nine yards.
I bet.
By the end of this deep dive, you'll have a pretty good understanding of how this whole cashless concept
Right.
aims to tackle corruption, like revolutionize healthcare and education, and even empower women,
Interesting.
all intertwined like it's a domino effect. And that first domino is,
Digital current.
yeah, digital currency, exactly.
It's a fascinating concept for sure.
Yeah.
The book really lays out a radical vision.
Yeah, really does. It mentions this Kalkiism Research Center
Okay.
in Nepal, and it was founded by a very unusual team, 50 top economists, and 50 leading doctors.
Yeah, that's quite a group.
I know, right?
Yeah.
What do you think brought them together? I mean, that's not your typical think tank.
I think a lot of it stems from a frustration with how things are in Nepal. You know, the book dives into Nepal's history of revolutions, and it highlights how past attempts at making big changes, well, they ultimately fell short.
Huh.
Corruption kept creeping back in, and the promises of those revolutions were never fully realized. So the name Kalkiism itself is very deliberate. It's inspired by a figure in Hindu mythology, Kalki, and he's the one who ushers in a new era, you know, kind of like a reset on a corrupted world. That's what they're aiming for.
So it's not just tweaking the system, it's like a total reboot.
Right.
A Kalkist revolution, as the book calls it.
Mm.
But what exactly does that even mean? How is it different from all those traditional revolutions?
Well, the book emphasizes peaceful transformation. It's like a shift in mindsets rather than a violent overthrow of leaders. And technology plays a huge role, you know, acting as a tool for empowerment. It's about using those digital tools to create a more transparent and equitable society.
Okay, I see where they're going with this. But, you know, the book claims that a cashless Nepal would just instantly flip the switch on corruption.
Oh, wow.
I mean, that's a pretty big statement. Is there any evidence to back that up?
Well, it's certainly more nuanced than just saying no cash, no corruption. The book breaks it down into three main ways a cashless system could fight corruption: transparency, inclusion, and efficiency.
Okay, let's break those down. What do they mean by transparency?
Okay, so in a fully digital system, every single transaction is recorded and traceable. So there's just no room for, you know, under-the-table deals or hiding bribes.
Right.
It makes it much harder to be corrupt without leaving a digital trail.
It's like a built-in accountability system.
Exactly.
I can see how that'd be a powerful deterrent.
Mm.
But what about inclusion? Nepal has a lot of remote villages. I mean, do they even have the infrastructure for a cashless society?
That's where the concept of financial inclusion comes in same. Kalkiism argues that even in those remote areas, people can participate through mobile banking, and that gives them access to financial services they might not have had before. So it's not just about eliminating corruption, it's about giving everyone a seat at the economic table.
So it's not just cleaning up the system. It's about making it more equitable.
Exactly.
Okay, I like that. What of the efficiency aspect?
Well, a cashless system streamlines so many processes. It reduces bureaucracy and really speeds up service delivery. Imagine things like welfare payments going directly to those in need, you know, without getting lost in paperwork and layers of middlemen. It's about making government services more efficient and responsive to people's actual needs.
Okay, I'm seeing how these pieces fit together, I am. But are there real-world examples of this actually working? The book mentions Sweden and Estonia as success stories, but are those fair comparisons to Nepal? I mean, those countries seem pretty different in terms of their economic and technological development.
True, true. Each country has its own unique context. But those examples do show that it's possible to achieve, you know, significant progress in areas like reducing corruption and improving efficiency just through digitalization. Sweden and Estonia, despite their differences, they've both seen some positive outcomes from embracing digital systems.
So the idea itself isn't completely out there. Then the book goes into some detail about how the dowry system harms women in Nepal. That's going to be a tough issue to tackle. How does going cashless even address that?
Well, that's where the transparency of a cashless system really comes into play. Dowry payments, although they're illegal, are still a problem. But in a cashless system, those transactions become traceable, and that makes it much harder to demand and receive dowries without facing the consequences.
So it's not just about making it harder for corrupt officials.
Right.
It's about addressing these deep-rooted cultural practices.
Yeah.
It sounds like they're trying to hit corruption from multiple angles.
Exactly. Plus, digital banking gives women greater control over their own finances, and that helps to, slowly chip away at those power imbalances that fuel these practices.
Okay, that's starting to make sense. It sounds like Kalkiism is saying the current system itself is enabling these problems, and switching to digital is like pulling the rug out from under them. But this next part had me scratching my head. They want to offer free healthcare and education.
Wow.
Not just improve it, but make it completely free.
Yeah.
And they claim this is a direct outcome of going cashless.
It's a bold claim for sure, but let's break down their logic. A
Um,
cashless system would make tax evasion a lot harder, leading to increased tax revenue for the government. And in theory, that gives them more to spend on those essential services.
but is it really enough to cover free healthcare and education for everyone? I know, that seems maybe a little too optimistic. What about the potential economic downsides or those unforeseen costs that might pop up?
Well, they address that by highlighting the impact of reduced corruption. Less money wasted on bribes and shady deals means more resources can be directed to those essential services. It's about plugging the leaks in the system.
So it's not just about generating more money, it's about using the money they already have more
Yeah.
effectively.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. But even if they can find the funding, wouldn't there be just massive logistical challenges in actually delivering free healthcare and education to everyone?
Oh, absolutely. The book acknowledges that it would require a huge investment in infrastructure and human resources. They're talking about building new hospitals, training more doctors, improving schools, and so on. It's a long-term vision, not a quick fix.
So it sounds like they're trying to create this virtuous cycle where a healthier, better educated population then contributes to greater economic growth, which then generates even more revenue for public services.
Exactly.
But how do they plan to get all this off the ground?
Well, this is where things get even more interesting. The book suggests putting the whole thing to a national vote, a referendum.
Wait, hold on. Is that even a thing in Nepal? Can they just put like a massive societal shift like this up for a popular vote?
Yeah.
I mean, what are the legal and political hurdles to actually implementing a referendum in Nepal?
Surprisingly, Nepal's constitution does have provisions for referendums, so legally it's not as far-fetched as it sounds.
Yeah.
But the book does acknowledge that it won't be easy to pull off. They anticipate pushback, especially from the political class they're trying to hold accountable.
Right, of course.
Those who benefit from the current system aren't going to just give up their power easily.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Hmm.
And I imagine getting people to actually vote on such a complex issue would be a challenge in itself. I mean, voter turnout is a concern in any democracy.
Absolutely. And there's the risk of this issue becoming divisive, creating some political instability. It's a high-stakes gamble for
Okay,
sure.
so the referendum itself is a big question mark. But they're framing this whole thing as a revolution. What exactly would this Kalkis revolution look like in practice?
It's fascinating. They draw comparisons to historical revolutions, but they really emphasize that this one is driven by technology, not violence. They see technology as this tool for empowerment, enabling people to create change peacefully.
So it's less about storming the palace and more about shifting mindsets. But how do they ensure that this isn't just another revolution that, promises change but ultimately falls short?
They are very aware of the pitfalls of past revolutions in Nepal. They emphasize the importance of sustaining change. They don't want to just replace one corrupt system with another. It's about creating a lasting shift in how the country operates.
It's a compelling vision, for sure. But, Nepal may seem a world away for some of our listeners. Why should they even care about any of this?
That's a great question. What if this cashless concept actually works? Could this model be applied elsewhere? It's a lot to consider, and I think it's a great place to pause and reflect for a bit. You got me thinking there. Could this Kalkiism movement, this whole idea of a cashless society as a catalyst for change, could it actually catch on in other parts of the world?
It's an interesting question. The book focuses on Nepal, but it definitely raises those broader questions about the role of technology in shaping societies. I think it's worth exploring which kinds of societies might be most receptive to a concept like Kalkiism and which ones might face the biggest hurdles.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's play that out. Where do you think a cashless revolution would be most likely to succeed?
Hmm. I think countries where digital payments are already pretty widely accepted would likely be more open to the idea. Places where using your phone to pay for things is already the norm might see it as a natural next step, maybe even like a welcome change.
Yeah, that makes sense. Parts of Europe and East Asia come to mind where cash is already becoming less common.
Yeah.
But what about the flip side? Where do you think this might run into the most resistance?
I think places with large informal economies, where a lot of transactions happen off the books, they might face some challenges. And you could also see some pushback in countries with limited access to technology or where there's a strong cultural attachment to cash.
That's a good point. It's not just about the technology itself. It's about the social and economic context.
Yeah.
Even within a country, you might see different levels of acceptance, right? Like older generations who are used to cash might be more hesitant, while younger people who are already comfortable with digital payments might be more eager to embrace it.
Absolutely. It's important to remember that technology adoption is never uniform. There will always be, those early adopters and those who are more resistant to change. But even beyond those practical considerations, there are some potential downsides to a cashless society that we need to address.
Okay, let's talk about those.
Right.
What are some of the risks or concerns we should be thinking about?
One major concern is privacy. In a fully cashless system, every transaction is recorded, and that creates this massive amount of data that could be vulnerable to hacking or misused by governments or corporations. It raises some serious questions about data security and, surveillance.
That's a big one. We're already seeing debates about data privacy with things like social media and online shopping. But imagine that amplified in a world where every financial transaction is tracked. It's a bit unsettling, to be honest.
Yeah.
Another potential issue is accessibility. What happens to people who don't have smartphones or reliable internet access?
Right.
I mean, they could be effectively excluded from the economy, which would exacerbate existing inequalities. It's ironic because Kalkiism aims to promote financial inclusion, but a cashless system could unintentionally create new barriers for some.
It's almost like a paradox, right?
Yeah,
The very people they're trying to help by giving them access to financial services could end up worse off if they can't participate in a cashless system.
exactly. And then there's the issue of security. What happens if the system crashes? Or if there's a widespread power outage? People might not be able to access their money, which could lead to chaos and disruption.
Yeah, you're right.
It highlights the importance of having really robust backup systems and contingency plans in place. We can't ignore the potential for increased government surveillance and control. If every transaction is tracked, governments could use that data to monitor citizens' activities, suppress dissent, or even target individuals they deem a threat. A cashless society that comes at the cost of freedom is not a future anyone wants.
That's a crucial point. The book doesn't shy away from these concerns. They emphasize the importance of, robust regulations and safeguards to protect individual rights and prevent abuse. It's not just about implementing the technology, it's about doing so in a way that is ethical and responsible.
Okay, so there are definitely some trade-offs to consider. It's not all sunshine and roses. But let's shift gears for a minute and talk about one of the root problems Kalkiism is trying to solve: corruption. The book argues that corruption is so deeply ingrained in Nepal that it's not just a bad habit, it's practically woven into the fabric of the system. It's almost like they're saying that previous attempts at reform failed because they didn't address this underlying issue.
Yeah. The book paints a pretty bleak picture of how corruption has become normalized, almost expected in some areas of Nepali society. It's heartbreaking to read about how people were so hopeful for change during past revolutions, only to see corruption just seep back in and undermine all that progress.
It's tragic.
Yeah.
And it's not just a few bad apples, right? They argue that the entire system, the way things are structured, it creates all these opportunities for corruption to flourish. It's less about individual morality and more about the rules of the game being rigged.
Exactly. And that's why they see a cashless economy as such a radical solution. It's not just about changing behaviors, it's about changing the game itself, making it much harder to even engage in corrupt practices.
Okay, but couldn't you argue that corruption is a human problem, not just a system problem? Even in a cashless society, wouldn't people just find new ways to cheat or exploit others? I mean, people are creative, right?
That's a valid point. Human nature is complex, and there will always be those who seek to, game the system, regardless of the rules. But the argument that Kalkiism makes is that a cashless system significantly raises the bar, making it much more difficult and, hopefully, less appealing to engage in corrupt practices. It's not a foolproof solution, but it creates a pretty powerful deterrent.
So it's about tilting the scales, making honesty the easier path. That makes sense. But let's talk about the potential benefits. This book paints a pretty inspiring picture of what a cashless Nepal could look like: universal healthcare and education, the end of the dowry system, a thriving economy. It all sounds a little too good to be true, to be honest.
It's definitely an optimistic vision, but the book doesn't just present it as this utopian dream. They back it up with, detailed analysis and practical examples.
Yeah.
It's not just wishful thinking, it's a carefully thought out plan.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Let's dig into some of those potential benefits. First up, free healthcare. We've talked about how they plan to finance it, but what would it actually look like on the ground?
Imagine a system where you can walk into any hospital or clinic and receive treatment without even having to worry about paying. No more crippling medical bills, no more having to choose between, putting food on the table and seeking medical care. It would be a fundamental shift in how healthcare is accessed and delivered.
That would be a game changer, especially for low-income families who often face those impossible choices. But what about quality? Would free healthcare mean sacrificing quality?
That's a valid concern. The book stresses that free doesn't have to mean subpar. They talk about investing in training more doctors, upgrading medical facilities, and implementing quality control measures to ensure that everyone has access to high-quality care.
So it's about expanding access while also maintaining standards. That's a tall order. What about free education? How would that work?
The vision is for a Nepal where every child, regardless of their background, has the opportunity to attend school and receive a quality education, from primary school all the way through university. It's about removing those financial barriers and creating a level playing field for all students.
Wow, that's ambitious. Education is such a powerful tool for social mobility and economic empowerment.
Yeah.
It could really break the cycle of poverty for many families. But wouldn't it require a massive overhaul of the education system? Where would they even begin?
The book talks about a phased approach, starting with improving existing schools, training more teachers, and developing new curricula that are more relevant to the needs of a modern economy. It's a long-term investment, and they acknowledge that it won't happen overnight.
It sounds like they're trying to build a more equitable society from the ground up. But even if they can overcome those logistical hurdles, how do they address the potential for pushback from, those who benefit from the status quo?
Yeah.
We've talked about the political challenges, but what about the social and cultural resistance they might face?
That's where public education and awareness campaigns come in. They need to really clearly explain the benefits of a cashless society, address people's concerns, and build trust in the system. It's not just about changing laws and policies, it's about changing mindsets.
So it's about winning hearts and minds. It sounds like they're trying to create a movement, not just implement a policy. But let's be realistic. Even with the best intentions and a solid plan, there are bound to be some challenges along the way, right?
Absolutely. No major societal shift happens without hiccups. The book acknowledges that, but they emphasize the importance of staying true to their core principles: transparency, equity, and sustainability.
Okay.
It's not just about achieving a specific outcome. It's about how they get there.
So it's about the journey as much as the destination. It's about building a system that is genuinely fair, just, and accountable. But all of this is still very theoretical. How do they actually plan to get this moving? What are the concrete steps they envision taking?
Well, they outline a phased approach, starting with building the technological infrastructure necessary for a cashless society. Things like mobile payment platforms, widespread internet access, and, robust cybersecurity measures.
That makes sense. You can't have a cashless society if people can't even access the technology. But technology is just the foundation, right?
Right.
What comes next?
They also need to implement legal and regulatory reforms to support digital transactions and protect consumer rights. Things like updating banking laws, establishing cybersecurity standards, and creating a framework for, digital identity verification.
So it's about creating the right environment for a cashless system to thrive. But we've talked about the potential for abuse, right? How do they plan to address that?
The book is very clear that a cashless society must be accompanied by really strong safeguards to protect individual rights and prevent misuse of data. They envision an independent oversight body to monitor the system and ensure transparency and accountability.
So checks and balances are crucial. They're trying to create a system that is both efficient and ethical.
Yeah.
But even with all the planning and safeguards in place, there's still this big unknown. Will the people of Nepal actually embrace this?
That's the ultimate test, isn't it? The book argues that the referendum is key. It's about giving people a voice, letting them decide whether they want this radical change. It's a gamble, for sure. But as we've been discussing, this whole Kalkiism thing is about more than just going cashless. It's about tackling corruption, inequality, and creating a more just society. Those are themes that resonate far beyond Nepal's borders.
Exactly. And that's why I think it's worth paying attention to what's happening there. Even if Kalkiism doesn't succeed, the lessons learned from their experiment, their successes and failures, could be incredibly valuable for the rest of the world.
It's a reminder that we don't have to accept the status quo. We can challenge the systems that hold us back and strive for something better. But after all this talk about Nepal, I think our listeners are wondering, how does this relate to them? What can we learn from this even if we don't live in a country that's considering a cashless revolution? That's a great question. The Kalkiism movement raises some pretty universal questions about the role of technology in society, the challenges of addressing corruption, and the importance of, civic engagement. Those are themes that we can all relate to, regardless of where we live.
Right.
You're right, there are some parallels there between this movement in Nepal and the challenges we face elsewhere.
Yeah, there are.
One of the biggest takeaways from Kalkiism is that it makes us rethink our assumptions about how societies operate. We just accept the way things are.
Right.
But this movement forces us to ask, could things be different? Could we use technology in more creative ways to solve these problems we're facing?
They're basically saying, don't just settle, imagine what could be. That's a pretty powerful message.
It is powerful. And it's
Yeah.
not just about the tech. Kalkiism also shows how important collective action is. They're not waiting for someone else to fix things. They're
Yeah.
taking charge and trying to create the future they want.
It's a reminder that we all have a role to play in shaping our societies, whether it's voting, volunteering, or even just having these conversations about the things that matter to us. We can all make a difference.
Exactly. And I think that's what's so inspiring about Kalkiism. It's about people coming together, trying to build a better future, not just for themselves, but for their kids, for their grandkids. It's about hope, the belief that we can create a more just and equitable world if we work together.
It's interesting, though, this whole movement is built around going cashless, something that comes with its own set of risks and potential downsides, like we talked about. Do you think they could reach their goals without such a drastic change? Could they tackle corruption and inequality without going completely cashless?
That's a tough question. I think it's possible that some of their goals could be achieved through other ways, but the cashless part seems really central to their vision. It's not just about the practicality of digital transactions, it's about the symbolism of breaking from the old system, making a clean break.
It's like a ritual cleansing, saying, we're leaving the past behind and doing things a new way. But we did talk about those concerns about privacy, security, and accessibility in a cashless world. Do you think their plan really addresses those?
The book does mention those and offers some safeguards, but would they be enough in reality? Who knows? I think it's so important to have open discussions about this stuff and make sure that if they do go cashless, it's done in a way that protects everyone's rights and freedoms.
Right. It's a reminder that technology is just a tool, and like any tool, it can be used for good or bad. It's up to us to make sure it's used responsibly.
Exactly. And that's a key point from all this talk about Kalkiism. It's not just about Nepal. It's about the choices we all face as a global society. We're all dealing with these challenges of the 21st century. It's a story about technology, yeah, but it's also a story about our values, about what kind of world we want to live in and leave behind.
So to everyone listening, we want to hear what you think. Is Kalkiism something other countries should try, or is it just too extreme? Could a cashless society really fix things like corruption and inequality, or would it just create new problems? We've given you a lot to think about, so now it's your turn to do some exploring of your own.
Yeah, stay curious. Keep asking questions and have those tough conversations about the things that are shaping our world. That's what the deep dive is all about.
Thanks for listening, and until next time, keep on exploring.